Last Friday, February 28, 2025, an unprecedented public confrontation took place between the US President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What was scheduled to be a White House press conference resulted in a diplomatic incident unprecedented in the history of modern international relations. For some, however, this diplomatic confrontation might be intended to show their voters that they are strong leaders and can defend the interests of their respective countries. On the one hand, it is important to note that this rare confrontation may show the deep differences between the two leaders on how to resolve the Ukraine crisis. On the other hand, this confrontation shows the diplomatic road that still needs to be traveled before Russia and Ukraine sit down at a negotiating table. Having pointed out the diplomatic context of this event, it is important to remember that diplomacy is the art of conducting the foreign relations of a subject of international law of a state, either by peaceful means such as negotiation through the organs of diplomacy. Also, diplomacy is the science of the respective interests of states or the art of reconciling the interests of nations with each other. Thus, diplomacy is the way in which international difficulties, in this case the Ukrainian conflict, can be peacefully resolved. During this diplomatic confrontation, US Vice President J.D. Vance noted that the route to peace and prosperity might be diplomacy. Let us remember that diplomacy is the management of international relations through negotiation, coupled with the fact that diplomacy is the ability and capacity to manage international relations. In other words, diplomacy is the process by which states seek to communicate and resolve conflicts through negotiation, whether formal or informal, rather than resorting to armed force. Following the context of the public confrontation, this was developing until it was mentioned that if the United States is a diplomatic country and committed to diplomacy, to which the Vice President of the United States stated that that is what President Trump is doing. In this regard, it can be noted that there is a relatively new type of diplomacy called head of state diplomacy, in which high level dialogues of strategic importance, sincere communication with citizens, as well as the execution of important diplomatic actions are carried out. Following the dialogue of this diplomatic event, there was an exchange of questions that the President of Ukraine asked the Vice President of the United States, asking him what kind of diplomacy he was talking about. In this regard, it is important to note that there are more than 46 types of diplomacy, of which I consider the following to be the most important. First is the ad hoc diplomacy, which is carried out by means of organs executing diplomacy or various subjects through special, permanent, or delegation missions. Second, we have diplomacy at the highest level or direct diplomacy, which refers to that exercised by heads of state through personal contact, either in official visits, working visits, or bilateral meetings. Preventive diplomacy, which seeks to avoid controversies or their escalation or extension. Modern classic diplomacy, which is carried out through classic diplomatic instruments such as foreign ministries, embassies, general secretariats of international organizations, permanent missions, special delegations. Bilateral diplomacy, which refers to diplomatic negotiations between two subjects of international law. There is also the parliamentary diplomacy, which is carried out by the legislative branch. We also have classic diplomacy, which is based on the existence of diplomatic relations between states and it's carried out through official organs. It also exists the epistolary diplomacy, and is when high-level negotiations take place through the exchange of letters, for example, to avoid a dangerous international conflict situation. Summit diplomacy, in which there is a direct dialogue between heads of states to examine the international agenda. There is the non-conventional diplomacy, which is carried out by actors other than the state, such as multinational companies. As we have seen, there is an important variety of types of diplomacy that can help to create the appropriate mechanisms for communication, dialogue, and negotiation between countries on a particular issue, in this case, such as the conflict situation in Ukraine. Diplomacy, being a continuous process, requires the skills and qualities of the diplomat. Let us remember that a diplomat is a person or people who intervene in the affairs of state that are dealt with between two or more nations. In addition, there are also the representatives of one state to another. The diplomat has the important task of defending the interest and security of his state, for which he requires social skills. One of the most important qualities of a diplomat is not to lose his composure in difficult or compromising situations. In addition to the above, the diplomat must be tactful, remain calm in adverse or difficult situations, be prudent, proactive, patient, and tolerant, with integrity, as well as have a great capacity for negotiation, information, and expression. That is how we have analyzed as briefly the concepts of diplomacy, the types of diplomacy, and the qualities of the diplomat in the context of the recent diplomatic confrontation between the United States and Ukraine.